So I arrived in my apartment. I walked in and it was empty. Empty. He had taken all of the furniture, plates, cups, spoons included. The only thing that he had left was my bed and one suitcase with a few pieces of clothing. He had emptied my wardrobe. I had a walk-in closet with a ton of my stuff. He had emptied all of that, taken absolutely everything, left me one suitcase of clothes, my bed, and my jewelry. And then he was very specific. When I asked him where my things were, he was like, well, I didn't take the most valuable things. I left your jewelry and I left your Chanel bag. So it means that you're gonna get the rest of your stuff. We just put it away in storage, because you're not gonna need it. Him now deciding what I am gonna need. So I was like, fine. But then I insisted I wanted to talk to my son. He let me talk to him. When he finally let me talk to him, I just cried. I couldn't. I just cried. So the nanny came. She arrived like about half an hour after I had gotten to the apartment. My baby was teething at the time. She was about 7 months, so she had like a high temperature and like was flushed and everything. I was just like, how could they leave a baby like this in the middle of nowhere? Like, just leave and then just your own agenda and go. And by the way, so when he left, it wasn't just him and my son. He left with his mother. I knew obviously immediately that he was not the one who instigated this. It was his mother. He would never be able to take care of our son by himself. He had never actually spent a single night of those 5 years of our son's life. He had never actually taken care of him by himself. Every single time, if I had to travel, he would take our son and drop him off at his mother's house so that he would be free for that entire week or those few days that I was away, and then he would pick him up on the day that he knew I was coming back and drop him off at the apartment for me to take care of. So I knew for a fact that there was no way he had instigated this. He would never saddle himself with the responsibility of taking care of this child by himself. So it was obviously his mother's plan. So I called the police. I had to call the police in order to report, number one, the kidnapping and everything that had been taken. I didn't really care about the furniture that had been taken. For me, it was like, my son. So the police came, they did their report, they took me to the station, and then because I was a foreigner, they called the Zimbabwean embassy. The embassy sent a representative and a translator who helped me to do the report and everything. And then they took me back to my apartment because they wanted to see what was happening. When we got there, the representative from the embassy, this wonderful woman, was like, you know what, you can't stay here. Come and stay at my house. So I packed up my baby and the nanny and we went and we stayed at her house. Over the next couple of days, I bought a few things like plates and cups and things like that so that we would be able to go back to the apartment and stay there until the end of the lease, which was at the end of June. So it wasn't even long. He had left Russia. He took my son on the 23rd of June, but we had until the end of June. I had until then to find somewhere else to live. I said to him, we don't have any money, obviously. And then he was like, fine, find a place and I will pay for it. I found an apartment. He sent me the money for July. We stayed there, and behind the scenes, like behind all of this that was going on, I had already initiated what is called a Hague petition. That is, if a parent abducts their own child and takes them to another country, you can report it and then you have to file what's called a Hague petition. But then it takes, I didn't know that it takes such a long time. because I was not a Russian citizen, I couldn't begin the proceedings in Russia. They told me that I would have to file a petition from Zimbabwe, which means my son would have to be reported as having been abducted from Zimbabwe. So I asked my sister, since I was now stuck in Russia with my daughter and I couldn't go anywhere, I asked my sister to do all of the reports. She went to Ministry of Justice, she went everywhere, and because she was being given the runaround, she initially went to Highlands Police Station, who refused to file the report because they said that a parent can take their child whenever they want, etc. But at the time, I didn't know that obviously they were working with my husband, and so they were under instruction not to take any reports that had to do with me. So my sister went to Central in Harare. That's where she made her report. She finally got all the documents and then sent those were sent to the Ministry of Justice. And then once she had those done, she sent the reports to me, because then they would have to file it with Interpol, etc. But once that was done, then they would have to send all of that proof to me, and then I would have to send it to the State Department in the US so that they would initiate their side of proceedings. It was July, August, September. September, before I got all of the documents that I needed from Zimbabwe to be able to send them to the United States. So in September, I sent the documents, and whilst that was happening, so that is happening on this side. In the middle, I was stuck in Russia, no real money. I tried to get some money because my businesses were still operating. I tried to get some money sent to me because my ex only sent me enough money for the rent. Didn't send any money for food, didn't send any money for, moving around, for doing anything. So I spoke to my accountant and he tried to send me money, but then he found out that I had been reported for externalizing funds. So I wasn't allowed to receive any money. There was no money that was allowed to be sent from my businesses, basically. So I was like, okay, that was strange. August came around. I asked him for rent for August, and he said no. He said to me it had been my choice to choose to live at this place which needed rent. I could have just gone to his grandmother's cottage in the countryside. Keep in mind, this is about an hour and a half outside of Moscow, in the middle of nowhere, where no one speaks English. If anything happens to me, I would struggle. I would have no money to get back into the city if my daughter got sick or anything like that. And because my daughter had no documents, in Russia you cannot get medical services without documents. Because she had no documents, the only place that could treat her if anything happened to her was the hospital where the surrogacy service was done. Basically the hospital where she was born, who handled her birth. They were the only ones that could treat her. So I knew I had to be very close to that place, and I had to be at least within half an hour walking distance. And this apartment that I had found was, about 20-minute walking distance. So I could get there. So I said to him, obviously, you know that is not practical. What happens if our daughter gets sick or I need to take her and I am an hour and a half drive outside Moscow? How will I get into Moscow? Where will I take her? He's like, oh, I guess you have a point. And then he just left it at that. Never sent any money, never checked, never nothing. I had to beg my friends, everybody I knew, to send me money. And this is from other countries. My friend, my best friend who lives in South Africa, sent me the money for my rent. So I paid August rent with that. I bought some food and I managed to keep going. September, my sister was able to send me money. I got more money from my sister who is here in the United States. So I was able to pay that rent and I was able to buy a little bit of food. But by this time, the money had stretched so thin I couldn't afford to buy enough food for me to be able to have 3 meals a day. I was down to 1 meal a day. And when I didn't have, like by the end of September, things were so bad that I had to eat my daughter's food. I started eating like just the porridge that she had, because he had only sent money to be able to buy her food, to buy milk and porridge. Actually, he ordered it. He ordered it and had it sent to me. No food for me, nothing. So that's what I ate as well. In October, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the Zimbabwean embassy and I told them my situation, and they started trying to help me to find a way to leave Russia to go back to Zimbabwe. My daughter's documents had still not come out, and though a judgment had been given at the end. Yes, the judgment came at the end of September. This kind of all coincided. The judge finally decided that yes, I could get a birth certificate for my daughter, but because we were not married legally with my ex, only my name would be put on her birth certificate, and then I would choose who's the father, I would decide who the father was and that name would be put in, but all of it needed my approval. So at the end of September, when this judgment finally came through, I was like, okay, excellent. But he had taken her birth record. So even with the judgment, and it wasn't enough for me to get a birth certificate. So with this decision, he said to me, so are you going to put me on her birth certificate as a father? And initially I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And then at some point I realized that not to aggravate him, to do something else, I would just say yes. So I changed my tune a week in, because I realized that because he could always appeal this decision. He had 30 days in which to appeal this decision that the judge had made. So they don't actually give you the judgment until after 30 days to make sure that no one wants to appeal. And in this case, it could only be him, the father of the child, who could appeal. So I decided, I realized it was in my best interest not to aggravate him, not to make him think that I was not going to put him on the birth certificate. So I said to him, no, I'm obviously going to put you on the birth certificate. I never want my daughter to have no father, etc. So I left it like that. I played nice. I suffered. I did what I did in the wings, but I played nice. I let him believe everything was fine, that he would be put on the birth certificate at the end of October, which was when the appeal period would end. In the meantime, in the middle of October, because I had run out of money, I did not have a single cent. I couldn't function, and I was so stressed. I didn't know what I was going to do, going forward, for rent, etc. And my stay, I had managed to pay up until the end of October. So I still had my jewelry, and my jewelry was very valuable. So I very randomly bumped into a guy who was our driver, who had previously been our driver, but my ex had let him go because he had a lot of substance abuse issues, and they just kind of didn't get along. So I suddenly bumped into this guy, and in Russia, I was completely isolated at this, during this period. My nanny had left at the beginning of July. Her and I had a disagreement, and she decided to contact my ex. He was happy. He was like, oh, good. Now I would be left alone. He bought her tickets. She went back to Zimbabwe. Didn't even say nothing. I was just like, okay, fine. She left. She went to Zimbabwe, left me by myself with my daughter. And I didn't really have any friends in Russia. I didn't really know that many people, and the people that I had known were obviously like from the arts and fashion and so on. And like with this kind of drama surrounding you, these are not the kind of people that could help me in any way. So I just stuck to myself every single day by myself, waking up trying to think of what to do. So September, October, I tried to sell my jewelry. I asked this driver to help me, and he said he would. He asked me to show him what I had. I showed him some of the pieces so that he could help me evaluate them. Then a few days later, he asked me to go with him to a shop to buy some children's clothes. I had a voucher which my ex had given me, where I could get some clothes for our daughter. So we went together, and whilst we were there, I didn't know that he had done this, but at some point when he would come and visit me sometimes, he had made a copy of my key. So whilst we were shopping, he gave these keys to a friend of his who went into my apartment, took all of the jewelry, took everything that was valuable, like my Chanel bag, all of the jewelry that was valuable, and left. He actually took a small suitcase of mine to put everything in, and he left. When I got back home after like this shopping with this guy, that's when I walked in and I just kind of felt something was off. I went into my room and I noticed my Chanel bag was missing. Then I went into the cupboard where I kept my jewelry, opened it, and it was empty. He had taken everything. I couldn't believe it, because this was the very last thing that I had that I could at least sell so that I could go forward. And he had taken it just like that. I tried to message him. He automatically blocked his phone. I called the police. They were very, very quick. There were cameras around the building, so they went into the cameras, got the footage, and they showed me the person who had come in. And they showed me him exiting holding a bag, but he had been wearing like a baseball cap pulled down low over his face. I told them whom I suspected, and then I contacted my ex and I asked him for this guy's passport, because they needed that because he was Ukrainian, and then they would like be able to stop him if he tried to leave Russia. My ex took 2 days to send me this passport. By the time that he sent it and I sent it to the police immediately called me and said, oh, he's literally just crossed the border into Ukraine. That's when I knew, obviously, that this guy had been working with my ex. It didn't take very long, like maybe a few days after that, this guy wrote to me, this driver, and he apologized. He just apologized, and that was it. He just said, I'm really sorry. My ex wrote to me after a week, and then he said to me if I wanted my jewelry back, I'd have to pay $10,000. And he made it seem as though it was a joke. He was like, oh, unfortunately, they've already sold a couple of the pieces. They've already sold this and that. But then, if you pay them $10,000, they'll give it back to you. They'll give you what's left. It was a joke for him. Next leaf. What was now happening in Zimbabwe. July, August, around August the 18th, my assistant at the space was given an eviction notice. The messenger of court came, my husband's lawyer came, Alex Mambosasa. He came, and they forced everybody off the property, told everybody they must leave, they must not take a single thing with them except their bags. My assistant was very smart, and I will forever be grateful for this. She took the company registration documents and also a file which had our registration books for all of our cars. We had about 12 vehicles at the time, and these were all like from G Taxi, the taxi business, and some private vehicles as well. So she took those, put them in her handbag, and she left with them. They closed the building, well, they closed the gate, threw out a couple of the things, you know, just to make it seem like it was a proper eviction and that they were not just taking over everything. They threw out a couple of couches from my cottage where I was living. So my sister hired a truck, picked up those things, took them to my father's farm. And you know, they immediately contacted me. There wasn't a lot that I could do besides contact my lawyer and try to see what he could do. He filed an ex parte application. There was a hearing. 2 weeks later, we were allowed back onto the property, and we reopened the restaurant again because they hadn't had time to really do anything, to take any furniture down or anything like that. So we reopened the restaurant again. We operated for 2 weeks. And then in September, bouncers suddenly came onto the property with this guy who was armed, a person who's very well known for violence. They came onto the property, chased all of the clients that were in the restaurant, basically kicked everybody out. Like, a few people wrote to me like, Priscilla, what is going on? I was in your restaurant. There are these bouncers that just came in and threw everybody out. I couldn't believe this was happening. Worst of all, through all of that, I found out that he had changed the ownership documents of the property. He had changed the directorship of the company. He had removed me. It had been myself and Alex Mambusasa, who was our lawyer. We were the two directors in the company. He removed me, put his assistant as a director. We had a family trust which owned the company, which owned our property. He removed me as a trustee. Basically, Mambusasa went and registered a whole brand new trust, which was filed sometime in July of 2019, which had apparently bought this property in 2017. Strange, but yes. So using this new trust that had been created in 2019, which had a whole different board of trustees and different beneficiaries. The beneficiaries were no longer ourselves and our children. It was now his assistant who was the beneficiary. They used that to remove me as a director from the company, removing basically my ownership or claim to anything. Then they created all these emails in which they had board meetings where they decided that I had misused funds that belonged to the company. I had stolen $750,000, as well as changing the ownership of vehicles into one of my personal company's names. Then they filed a report at Commercial Crimes Division, CCD, about all of this, that I had stolen $750,000. I had changed the ownership of 12 vehicles and put them in my name. However, these vehicles had already been imported. They initially landed in the country in my company's names. They had been ordered in my company's names and arrived in my company's names. So there had been no changes made at all. These are things that I found out whilst I was going through the starvation, the isolation, trying to figure out what was happening, etc. And discovering as well somewhere along the way that he had people watching me in Russia. I was terrified, like, for my physical safety. I knew that he would do anything that he could to take my daughter, because at some stage he came to Russia and he said to me, you know, Priscilla, I'm never going to stop. You need to stop fighting me, because I am never going to agree to lose. I'm not going to lose. So you need to just accept what's happening and just stop. I would never just stop. He phoned my father during this period, August, September, and he told him that he was going to strip me of every single thing that I had, and that included taking my children. He knew that that was more important to me than anything. He knew that I didn't, like, of course I would fight for my property, I'd fight for my business, but then I would never fight for it as much as I would fight for my children. He knew that I would never back down. What would be the point of me continuing to live if I knew that I had given up on these children? I'd given up on myself. So I continued to fight. I fought where I could. And some things I just let go. Like belongings, I let them go. But the cars, I knew those would be useful to me. So I held on to those. There was nothing that they could do because they were all registered in my company. After the bouncers came to the space and kicked off everybody, most of the vehicles, actually all of the vehicles, except 2, which were not on the property when this happened, were taken by these bouncers. And Mbambo Sasa, he put his people in place on the property to guard everything. And then, throughout all of this, there are some people that really, really, really helped me. Some people that remained on my side, people that were not manipulated into believing or supporting this whole cause. So I had my assistant, my head of finance, who did their very best to keep me in the loop of what was happening, who refused to assist them in the persecution of me or trying to make up crimes or things like that. They refused to participate in that. But then obviously with everybody that supports you, there's also a set of people that don't. So this set of people that didn't support me were the ones that were used to like do certain things, For instance, the vehicles that were left on the property, my ex told them, the employees from G-Taxi, that they could take them and that they could use them and keep the money for themselves. But, obviously that is just ridiculous. You are starving me, your ex and your child. You're starving us and telling other people that they can take these vehicles. So my sister hired someone, an investigator, who found all of these vehicles and had them impounded. They were taken to Southerton, where they were all impounded, which was better for me, that they stay impounded rather than being driven around by people. That in itself was just crazy. Mambo Sasa tried to go to them and tell them that he had authorized them to take them, that he had the authority, etc. But then, because these vehicles were registered in my private company, which he had nothing to do with, or my ex had nothing to do with, I was the only person who could give authority for them to be released. So thankfully, they had no grounds to release them, and they refused to release them. So they just remained there until I got back to Zimbabwe. But to go back, all of this was happening. The space was finally closed. Now, for what seemed like it would be permanent, October came. I pretended that I would put my ex on the birth certificate so that I would have some peace. And this gave me time to kind of make sure that I was putting my fight in place. So I had been working with the embassy to try to figure out ways for me to leave Russia with my daughter, even though I didn't have all of these documents. I kept that quiet. I walked to the embassy because I didn't have any taxi money. It was like an hour walk, but I walked anyway. And I would also make sure that I arrived just before lunch so that I would take advantage of the fact that they had a chef and I would eat there. It would be my one meal at least, and then I would be fine. And this was late October. It was getting really cold. Winter, it had already started to snow, but I walked and I got there. The end of October came, and the appeal period ended. Just before it ended, but soon after, I had been robbed. Besides sending me the "I'm sorry" message, this driver also told me that I shouldn't put my ex. This was his little bit of help that he was giving me. You know, despite robbing me, he was giving me this. He said I should not put my ex on our daughter's birth certificate because he planned to plant drugs in my apartment, then call the Russian authorities. I would be arrested, my daughter would be taken away, and with his name being on her birth certificate, they would automatically hand her to him. Then he would pick her up, whisk her off to the United States, and he would have both children, and I would be in a Russian prison. So I felt like, okay. So yes, I let October go by. October 30th, he came. We met at the registry, at the birth certificate registry, and I told him no, I wasn't putting him on the birth certificate. So he was like, fine. He wouldn't give me the birth record, so I wouldn't be able to register our daughter anyway. I would just now be stuck in Russia with no way of leaving and with no way of getting her documents. He left and went to Zimbabwe. He had all of the furniture emptied out of the property, at least so I thought, but the main house was empty because I saw pictures of it online. He listed the property for sale with Pam Golding and a couple of other agencies. My neighbor is actually the one who told me this. She wrote to me and she said, "Oh, Priscilla, are you selling your house?" Because I saw an agent showing the property. And I was like, oh, no, I didn't know that. So I just kept that to myself. I didn't react. I didn't say anything. I just notified my lawyer in Zimbabwe, who said we would be able to file a caveat so that it wouldn't be sold, but I shouldn't panic. First week of November came. I used the documents that I had. I tried to get a new birth record, but the most that they could do was just issue a second document saying that the child was born, etc., etc., but it wasn't the original birth record. I took that to try and get a birth certificate. They said no, they needed the original birth record. I went to the embassy. They gave me an emergency travel document and everything. I booked a flight. I tried to leave with just that, and they sent me back at the border. I couldn't leave. I needed an exit visa. And for me to get an exit visa, I needed a birth certificate. I needed all of that. I went back, and by now, November, because I didn't have any money left, I started living with the lady from the embassy. From the beginning of November, I had nowhere else to go. I started living with her. I went back to her house after this failed attempt to leave. And the following week, out of the blue, around the 10th of November, around the 7th, 8th of November, a lawyer in Russia wrote to me and said to me they had been authorized by my ex to release my daughter's birth record. I was very calm. I didn't want to show her how desperate I was, how I needed it. I just said, okay, can I meet you tomorrow? And she said yes. I didn't want to, I was like, oh my God, this is my ticket to leave. So I went, I met her. She came with me into the registration office, and then as soon as she gave me the document, I was just like, the relief. they told me it would just be, they would give me the birth certificate right away. It was just a matter of hours. So I did everything that they required. I got the birth certificate by the end of that day, and that was the beginning of me really being able to now like see myself leaving. So I went back to the Zimbabwean embassy. They contacted who they could to try to figure out how I would get this exit visa, what the process was, what I needed to get together. And then we finally found somebody that knew what was going on. They actually came with me. This lady accompanied me, and the translator helped me for the next 2 to 3 days to get this exit visa. When we finally got it, I couldn't believe it. Like I looked at it, I was just like, wow. I rebooked my tickets. I was able to actually get tickets for the very next day. Actually, yeah, it was the very next day. I didn't waste time. I packed my things. I had everything that had been in the rental apartment that I had lived in until the end of October, I had packed and I had stored at the Zimbabwean consul's apartment in Moscow. He had very graciously allowed me to store my things there, and they're still there today. So I packed 2 bags, the 2 bags that I was allowed on the flight, packed mostly my daughter's things and diapers, the things that I knew that I needed and wouldn't be able to afford to buy. I packed all of those things, and just a few of my own clothes, just things to get me by. And I went, like my host, this wonderful woman and her family, they took us to the airport. You know, throughout this entire period, what was the scariest for me was I knew this man was going to try to stop me at every single step. He had tried to stop me from going to Zimbabwe. He had tried to stop me from doing so many things. I was terrified on the way to the airport that he would try to stop me again from getting there. But we got there. I checked in, I boarded my flight. I held my breath basically the entire time until the plane taxied and took off. And I knew I was finally on my way back home. I was finally on my way back to Zimbabwe.